Right. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on when you might be watching this, if you're on YouTube. And also, I wanted to say right off the bat, if you are on YouTube watching this and you are getting value from these videos and enjoying these sharings, please do like and subscribe so more people can discover us. So today I wanted to share some thoughts on the life of Joseph. And more importantly, what I really wanted to do is just kind of we're going to do a lot of reading, and I'm not going to do a ton of talking other than reading, but I wanted us to go through an exercise together of kind of reading between the lines, because as we're going to see, we are going to read about 13 years of Joseph's life in what, if you depicted it in, say, a cartoon, could be expressed in a matter of 10 minutes. And so undoubtedly, a lot of the stuff that we're going to read about, there are blanks in there that we have to consider what could have been happening and do our best to try to understand what that would have been like and what things went through the person's head and how we can learn from this, right? So I've titled this The Trials of Joseph, the Life and Mindset of the One Who God is With. So let's get started here. Just starting off with Joseph's early time with his brothers, let's just read chapter 37. So if you're with me, now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I've had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, "Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "I will go." Then he said to him, "Now go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they're pasturing the flock." Then the man said, "They have moved from here, for I heard them saying, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. When they saw him from a distance, and before he had come close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him in one of these pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him." that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. And as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not." Then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So let's take a look at some of the stuff we've got here in this. So in verse 2, we kind of get a preview of what's going on in the relationship with his brothers, right? So the first thing that happens is Joseph is out with his brothers, and it says he brought a bad report back to his father. And to me, I'm like I said, we're gonna do some reading between the lines. So I'm gonna give you guys some of my thoughts that have bubbled up. And if we have any other ideas, we can discuss that later on. But sounds to me like something of a bit of a kind of tattletale situation where, he was telling on his brothers for not doing good stuff, which, sounds like legitimately they weren't the greatest dudes anyway. But, this type of stuff doesn't always help relationships get better, right? And then the dream comes up and the brothers are even more peeved at him because they're like, "What? I'm not going to bow down to you." And then interestingly, the same thing with his dad, right? "Are we going to really bow down to you?" So this is where things get interesting when Jacob sends him to his brothers to go check and, be the little reporter, find out how things are going, see if everything's good. And this is just so revealing because, gosh, could you imagine, like, I'm thinking of Kenny and Laura right now. It's like, could you imagine 15 years down the road and one of your children is cool with killing your other child and all the consequence that comes along with that? It's insane, right? It's completely insane because it doesn't just show disdain for Joseph himself. They know that Joseph is the most special child, rightly or wrongly, right, to their dad, and they don't care. They would put him through that pain of his son being gone just because they don't like him and they don't want his life to be anything good that messes with them. So there's some other stuff I wanted to talk about in this too, because like I said, let's read between the lines and see what we can see here, because some of this stuff I find super interesting. So, and this is another reason why you have to be careful when you're reading this stuff, because sometimes the scripture just blasts through history in a way where it doesn't give any of the emotion that's going on, right? So let's think about this for a second. Just put yourself in the situation. Try to make a live action film in your head, right? 23, so it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic they took him and threw him in a pit. Now, it just sounds like Joseph is like a doll with no life in him, and they just do these things and it happens, right? But can you imagine there being a bit of a struggle, there being some shouting? Joseph probably at least got maybe a scuff or a cut falling down a pit, you would think, right? Since it sounds like it's maybe was originally used as a well. Again, I'm speculating to some degree, but it's like this type of interaction doesn't happen without a little bit of tension and offense and shock and, you know, just emotions, right? And so what is going on here is Joseph saying, let me out, bring me up. What are you guys doing? You know, like, okay, joke's over, right? Whatever, who knows, right? All this sort of stuff. And it's just really messed up. Like, this is like, you know, siblings torturing each other kind of stuff, right? And then they just sit down and have a meal. Oh my gosh. So then they decide, oh, well, you know, like this is actually a pretty bad idea. Maybe we shouldn't be that, like, we shouldn't do something that bad. We shouldn't kill him. That's not good. And why don't we just make some money instead? And, you know, you can tell they're not very smart because, well, I don't know, maybe that was the going rate for a slave at the time, or they just wanted, maybe the Midianites were good negotiators or something, because 20 shekels of silver is only like them getting like 10 bucks a piece or 15 bucks a piece. It's not really anything exciting. So all this stuff going on, and it's just really interesting how they were willing to do this. And then they, you know, they cover up what they've done by slaying or, you know, slaughtering a goat, wiping the blood on it, and putting their dad through this extreme trauma of his son perceptibly being killed by a wild beast. So one of the things I wanted to highlight that we find out in chapter 37 is that there was just major brokenness in Jacob, Israel's family. And, you know, there was trauma going on. People were hurting, you know, people were harming each other psychologically, you know, like people were doing hurtful things. And Joseph, he's a person who had trauma, right? Just put yourself in the shoes. You get thrown in a pit. Your brothers are talking about whether they should kill you or whether they should do this or that. They decide to sell you as a slave to go off somewhere, and you're just completely on your own as a 17-year-old with nothing, I assume. And everything that you've known is gone. That would mess some people up, right? How many people have endured things in that territory of trauma and it messes them up for life, right? So this is something we can relate to, in that we have trials in life, and Joseph suffered these things, and yet somehow he managed to do great things. So something to consider also, it's interesting, the whole Reuben thing, because in chapter 35 of Genesis, you find out he slept with one of his dad's concubines. And so I kind of have a suspicion that he was trying to, like, you know, do something good to try and get back on the good side of his dad with this whole rescuing Joseph. And then that didn't work out for him, because I guess he went off and worked some other part of the flock while they decided on this sell him scheme. And then they sold him before he got back to go and rescue him, or whatever the case may be. It's just interesting, all this dynamic stuff. So anyway, that's just kind of the early days. So then Joseph ends up being, you know, a servant in the house of Potiphar in Egypt. So let's read chapter 39. So now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned to Joseph's charge. And with him there, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Pretty amazing. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do this great evil and sin against God?" As she spoke to Joseph day after day, wow, like hounding him, "Come have sex with me." Oh my gosh, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her or be with her. So he didn't want to be around her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. So she caught him by himself. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and he fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I had raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside." So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Now, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him in jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. Such an interesting journey. And again, it's like some of this stuff, like verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And then verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And then snap of the fingers, the chief jailer just gives everything to Joseph. So clearly, in my perception, this is not something where Joseph just walks in the door to the jailer of the jail, and the jailer's like, "Who's that guy? Oh, new boss of the whole place. I just know it." I don't think that's how that happened. So, we can discuss it a little bit. So, I already mentioned this stuff. Now, this is the part that I find revealing. So the reading between the lines, right? Verses 3 and 4, now his master saw that the Lord was with him and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over the house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. What does it mean that Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him, right? Just that's one that's worth meditating on, because what does that mean? What did Potiphar see? What did Potiphar see going on with Joseph, despite all of the stuff Joseph had just dealt with? He got sold as a slave, completely separated from his family, all the stuff going on. And somehow Potiphar seeing that the Lord is with him. So in my mind, that's got to be his attitude. It's got to be his behavior. It's got to be how he speaks, right? How he interacts with others, how he interacts with his tasks. It's the way he carries himself and the way he talks, right? And so it doesn't take very long, it seems, though, for Potiphar to recognize that this guy is going to do a better job managing things than whoever else is already doing it, right? So he puts him in charge of everything. But unfortunately, Joseph gets to deal with another traumatic event, right? Because he's done nothing wrong, Absolutely nothing wrong. It's not like with his brothers where there is some rivalry and he maybe was a tattletale or anything like this. He's just been carrying out his business, has never even approached or had any desire to do anything wrong by his master, it seems. And yet his wife, the master's wife, wants him so bad, she gets bitter to the point of just saying, I want this guy gone and I'm going to get him in trouble because he won't do what I want him to do. So she lies, makes up the story. And, this is another thing where it's like, well, how did this actually go down, right? We read in verse 19, now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him saying, this is what your slave did to me, his anger burned. That's all we get, right? This isn't some sort of situation where it's like, oh, this is libel. I'm going to take you to court and we're going to discuss this and find out the truth of the matter. No, it's just going to be Joseph's word versus his master's wife's word. And we don't even know if Joseph even attempted to defend himself. It's very possible he would have been like, I didn't do that, but who's the master going to believe, right? And so this is just another thing where it's like, wow, this sucks. And he just had to go to jail, having done nothing wrong, right? How would that make you feel? I know how it would make me feel. And we don't exactly know how long the time frame was of this, but we'll find out later on that Joseph was 13 years in Egypt before he became in service to Pharaoh. So some portion of that 13 years was spent in Potiphar's house. And then we find out, though, as soon as he goes to jail, it seems like God gives him favor and the jailer puts him in charge of everything. But here's what I think is going on here. Because think of any jail, right? There's going to be some sort of intake. You're going to be assigned your cell. You're going to change your clothes or whatever they do, right? And so there's something about Joseph and his attitude and the way he speaks and the way he carries himself, the way he interacts with others that catches the attention of the chief jailer in such a way that the chief jailer goes, I might be better off making this guy in charge of my whole jail than who I've currently got helping me. And so what is it about Joseph? What is he doing in how he lives and how he talks and how he walks and how he thinks that is causing these situations where God can grant this favor that just transforms the situation? And why is it that in these situations, he's always being given responsibility? He's been given charge over things, right? And so I think it's just obvious that Joseph is a diligent person, because who here would put someone over charge of basically everything in your life who is obviously irresponsible or is questioned? You don't know if they're responsible, right? So Joseph is behaving in ways that make it really obvious that he is a diligent, responsible person that cares about stuff being taken care of properly. So these are things we can learn. These are things that we can mimic, right? So carrying on, let's go to chapter 40. After he's been established in the jail and he is now the head guy there. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me. And on the vine, there were 3 branches, and it was budding. Its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Verse 14, very important. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. That verse, those 2 verses, are so valuable because they give us insight into what's going on in Joseph's head. We know the stuff that he is contemplating, right? He knows that he is wrongly there. He doesn't want to be there. He's not cool with it, right? He's making the best of the situation and the cards that he's been dealt, but he doesn't want it. He wants to be doing something better. He wants to be in a place where he can live freely. Doesn't want to be stuck in a jail. And he still is thinking about the fact that he was kidnapped from his home and unrightfully taken, right? Anyhow, when the chief baker saw that he interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket, there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. And the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Not that great a message to have to give to somebody. Thus it came about the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Joseph interprets these dreams, and that crucial moment where we see what's going on in Joseph's head. He's looking for his way out, right? He's not just passively sitting by, hoping that God fixes his problems for him without him having to do anything. He's looking, where can I act? Where can I change how can I make this different? How can I get out of this, right? He's actively looking, right? That's a characteristic of Joseph. He's acting. He's involved. He's doing things. He's not just passively absorbing what's going on around him. He's not just sitting back and going, oh, I'll just wait till something changes. He's taking advantage of whatever opportunity he can find to improve his circumstances. And he still knows, like, you know that he remembers that dream when he was 17, and that has had an impact on him, and that he thinks it's meaningful. So he's looking for something different in his life. This is not what he expects his life to turn out like. He has better, bigger things in his mind. He asks to be remembered, and he's not just saying something vague like, hey, just remember I did this for you. He specifically says, do me this kindness, mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of here. He's like asking the guy, dude, after this works out for you, tell Pharaoh what happened so that I can come out, right? That I'll be recognized for having done something cool. And here's another kind of travesty of sorts, right? The cupbearer forgets. Could you imagine? Could you imagine somebody interprets your dream and then it happens exactly like that 3 days later, just as the interpretation says, and you forget? Like, would you not just be like overwhelmed? Like, I cannot believe that guy just told me exactly, like he just predicted the future. and you forget. It's just amazing, right? But this is, God has a plan. And this is something we learn is that, we're going to find out the next line we read. It was 2 years later that this cupbearer finally remembered. So Joseph had 2 more years in the jail. And clearly, his character didn't change during that time, as we'll see. So let's move on to our final chapter to read for the day. All right, so this one's going to be a little bit longer. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up by the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. He finally realizes, oh my gosh, how did I screw this up and forget about this guy? Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I was standing at the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I've never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears, full and good, came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, and there was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's going to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come, and the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will bring it quickly about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the foods of the good years that are coming, and store up the grain for the food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Verse 37, now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to the servants, can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over all my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all of the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall raise a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zephanath Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth in the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up the grain in a great abundance like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. These two verses coming up are super important. Now, before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph has said, there was a famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, you shall do. When the famine was spread all over the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. All right, so quick overview here. Pharaoh has the dream, no one can interpret it. Joseph has quite a bit of experience with this now, right? He had his own dream. It was kind of an obvious interpretation, I guess, because even the family members just knew what it meant. The cupbearer and the baker have their dreams, and he interprets those. And so you see this preparation of how God works with Joseph, right? And this is the same with each of us. God works with us in a way that we work with, right? So each of us has something unique, special, some gift, some ability, some passion, and God will work with that, and he will develop it, and he will continue to level up that thing that he works with us in. The cupbearer remembers Joseph, finally realized that they forgot about him, comes in, and Joseph correctly interprets the dream, and he gives the proper course of action based on the revelation of the dream. So we see here, he's age 30. Remember, the whole story started when he was 17. So I don't know, maybe 6 months or a year transpired between when he got thrown in the pit and sold for slavery, maybe. Maybe it was really quickly after that. We know at least 2 years he was in the jail, because that's how long it took between him interpreting the dream and coming before Pharaoh. So at least 2 of these 13 years were in jail, but I'm going to say it was probably 4 plus, and maybe 9 of them were with Potiphar, or maybe it was 4 years with Potiphar and 9 years in prison. We don't know, right? But we know that he was taken from his native land, taken from his family, and he was placed as a servant, a slave, and put in prison during this time, having done nothing to deserve it. But in the midst of all this, he keeps his character and his orientation toward God pure, committed. He has diligence. He's willing to work and take charge of things. He's not one of these people who, we've all had this, maybe like in our younger days at one of our first jobs. There's always two types of people, and then in between, there's the type of person who is lazy and wants to do as little as they possibly can to get by. And there's the person who is glad to go above and beyond, and they will be promoted and receive more responsibility. Obviously, Joseph is that type of person. So we see that is a character trait of Joseph that we can mimic, right? If we want our lives to have something exciting and just amazing going on the way Joseph is, despite our past and our trauma, we have to be diligent and willing to go the extra mile, because that's how God can bestow opportunity upon us. And here again, in the same way that verse 14 in the previous chapter, where Joseph reveals, just remember me and mention me to Pharaoh, because I'm not even supposed to be here. This is not right. And then in verse 50 to 52, he names his firstborn son, the meaning, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And his second son, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So most of us here who have children can probably attest to the fact that when we name our children, there's some sentimentality involved in that. It's not something we just flippantly do, unless we hear from the Lord and say, okay, I guess that's where we're supposed to name him or her. But you put some thought into it. And this is like, you have to understand these two verses here, the naming of his children, this is not just some, utilitarian thing. Like when people name their children, it is emotional. And so he's revealing what is deep in his thoughts in this moment when he's naming his children, that God has made him forget all of his trouble and all of the pain of his father's house, his family, his childhood. And then he mentions that God has made him fruitful in the land of his what? His affliction, right? Of the place where he is constantly reminded that of his painful past, because why is he even there? He's there because he was sold by his brothers into slavery, mistreated by them. So just to give a bit of overview here, Joseph was a traumatized person. This is a guy who experienced trauma and abuse, right? But his attitude paved the way for him to be lifted up into great effectiveness and purpose despite his past. He didn't adopt a victim mentality. He couldn't have. Otherwise, he would have just been, wasting away as a piddly servant, not doing anything important in Potiphar's house, and who knows where he would have went. Or if he decided to adopt the victim mindset after he got thrown in prison unjustly, he would have just rotted in prison and sat there for who knows how long until something else changed. Who knows? But he clearly did not wallow in pity for himself or regret. He was looking for opportunity. He had the willingness to work diligently and take on responsibility. And something I forgot to mention that I thought of earlier too is that clearly it seems that Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he did instantly give him all this authority, right? But Joseph, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, clearly incited trust by Pharaoh. And so it was these past experiences of him being in the jail, building some sort of repertoire of character with the chief jailer that gave him all the responsibility of the jail. He had that same experience with Potiphar, who put him over his whole house, where he carried himself in a way where he showed that he was diligent, showed that he cared, showed that he was, someone who wanted to do the right thing. And God would bless that. And then he would just get more responsibility, right? So if we want God to work in our lives, we need to be active people willing to work, not passive people waiting for things to come our way. And we want to be people who are looking how to serve, not people just looking to consume, right? Because we live in the modern world, there are a lot of things to consume, that can feel like they're making a difference for us, but we have to balance activeness. We can't just be taking things into us. We need to be going out and doing things. All right, final point here. Setbacks are not to be given too much concern, because carrying on with what is in front of you with diligence while being patient for better things to come is essential to the mindset of someone who knows God is with him or her. If we have a victim mentality that our past, our present, our limitations, people are bad, this is bad, bad things have happened to me, if that's what you're focused on, nothing will change. If you focus on opportunities and where you can set your hand to work, things will change with patience and with an attitude of perseverance and persistence. So that's what I mainly had to share with you guys today. So I hope that was of some value. And I'm just going to leave the discussion off recording. So if you are enjoying what you're seeing with our videos from Allegiance to the King, check us out online, allegiancetotheking.org. Send us an email, contact@a2kchurch.org, or find us on Facebook. Don't forget to like the video.